Okay. Hello everyone. Let's get started. Great. I hope you had a good weekend. So last session we talked about like database design and a few concepts about database. We learned about some terminologies from primary key, data entity, primary keys, foreign keys. And then at the end of the session, I gave you a few minutes to work on that practice. We are going to kind of like start from there. Okay, and from that practice and try to continue that conversation from there. Next session, like we won't be able to complete this presentation today. We'll complete it like in like today and then also like next session. And then on Friday, we'll start using Access for database design, like work with Access. Just a heads up that we will work on with Access on Friday. So let's go here, click on this link to be able to access this. Okay. Make sure to follow up and then like add your inputs at the end of the session. Again, you have to download, you need to download it, your input, and then upload it for the class. Okay, let me just reset this. Okay. For some reason I have it. Okay, with your inputs. Just see. Still has it. Okay, it's not an issue. So add your name and then let's continue. So last session, we kind of like ended the class with working on this practice. We had a data set that had the same issues that we talked about last session. Okay, if you recall from last session, there was like we had a reservation table. We have a reservation table that indicates like records for a reservation. What do we have here? We have the reservation. We have like information about the customer who made the reservation, the name, their phone number, their address. We know the bike model and category of the bike that was reserved, and then price and payment methods. So looking at this, again, kind of like reviewing what we talked last session, we can see the same issues here as well. What are the issues? Redundancy, like anomaly, like update issues. Like if you want to update something, it will be very difficult. Identity issues, identify like the identity, like customers and like bike models here. Let me start from this. One example would be that, okay, if I want to update a customer's like address here, how many records do I need to update? How many records or how many attempts should I make? It could be more than one, right? So for example, I have for this person, I have 1, 2 records, 3 records. So if I wanted to update their that person's address, I have to do it 3 times. 3 times. And then, so that's a update issue. Then redundancy issue. I've repeated that info in every reservation. The same way about the bike model and category. I've repeated that every time. So I have redundancy issue. Identity issue. If I look at this, like, what is it like this, like, for example, this bike. Okay. Hey. Sorry about this. Let's see if we get it back. Okay. Okay. So, are with me? Yes. Hello. Okay. So. Okay. Let's continue. Okay. So, if I look at this Trade Pro 2, if I ask you, I have two records, like three records for Trade Pro 2. If I ask you, are these the same bike? Like these reservations are made for the same bike. Can you tell me 100% if they're the same bike? I cannot say that because like we could have bikes with the same name, with the same category. Identity issue. So because of these issues with this design, then we talk about database design. We talk about how we are going to create a relational database. We are going to fix these issues with taking a few steps. Okay. So what are the steps? Trying to like create, like identify the entities and then create separate tables, separate like data entities. Place the like attributes of like identify the attributes and place them in the right place. So we don't like we don't have to like repeat some like info in every table, so that we have a way to identify each person, each item, each product, each record uniquely. So we talk about this. I want to give you like a to fill out this and then okay, once you do that, then you can continue here. Okay, so it's to do that. Add the data entities, add their attributes. We talked about primary keys and foreign keys. What is the primary key? It's a way that uniquely identify a record of a table. So every record in each table gets a unique identifier. Then we use foreign keys as a way to link the table. Let's see.
So, based on my understanding, all the three tables have to have at least one key similar and one key in common, so they can be all linked together. Is that correct?
Good question. So every data entity has only one primary. One primary.
No, I understand.
Okay. You add the primary keys and then you will see which tables are linked to each other and then use like primary keys as a way to connect them, create that link. And that primary key, when it's used in another table, is called foreign.
Mhm. So no, my question, so we have table 1, 2, and 3. Imagine table 1 and 2 have a key in common, but table 1 and 3 don't have any key in common. Therefore, table 3 has a key in common with table 2. If you want to move from table 1 to table 3, you have to go to table 2 first, and then from table 2 you can go to table 3. Is
Okay.
that the wait?
No,
Is that
I
the case,
think
or we
like
have to have a
you
key
should
common
like
for all three?
don't like get your like yourself in this like loop because it can like could be misleading. The first thing is that you always need to create the data entities and add the primary keys. Don't think about the links.
Oh,
Okay. Add the table, they like the name of the like data entity, add their attributes, add the primary key, and then see what is missing in each table. That's when you identify the links. We'll talk about it, but like takes the steps one at a time. Don't think about like how I'm gonna connect them. The last step is to add the links. Take those steps and then we can talk about it. Okay. Before I start, I want to make a point. Every time you come to class, you have to study before coming to class. Particularly if you miss the class. If you come to class without a study, without like preparation, like everything will look confusing, like, oh, I don't know it. Because like, especially if it's a Friday through Monday, I've forgotten everything. So if you don't do that, you'll kind of like, again, will fall behind. That will be difficult to catch up. Especially from now on, we do every session, we do a practice that is dedicated for a particular topic. So if you miss a class, you technically miss the practice for that dedicated topic. And we won't go back to it. So it's on you to catch up, especially if you missed it. Do that, always a study for it. I try to review some of the things we do in the prior session and then connect them. But I want to spend time to just like, review everything from last session because, hey, there were people from last session and their time is valuable. I'm not going to take the time of the class just to kind of like review everything just because someone missed it. Keep that in mind. Okay, so now looking at this table, what do I see? I see three data entities. I have reservation, I have customer, and I have bike. Like, is a category or a bike model for itself is a data entity. It's just a field that is describing something else. It is describing a bike. That bike's model, that bike's category. The same way like the customer address. It is describing something about something else. It's about the customer. It is describing, it's an attribute of something. Okay. So we want to like extract them and place them at the right place. So in this case, I have one customer. And now I want to like in one place, only the things that only describe customer, only describe a customer. Okay. So for example, like reservation. Should I place reservation ID into the customer table? Reservation is not describing anything. There are three things that are describing something about customer. Their names, their phone number, and their address. So these are the only attributes of a customer that I have. I'm recording it. I'm going to place that into the customer table. Okay. So customer name, address, and then phone number. Let's just say phone. I kept the first one just because like I want to add now every table has to have a primary key. What's the primary key? A unique identifier. Each record in that table needs to be uniquely identified. And that's why we have the primary key. It's a column that assigns a unique or random number, random thing to every record in the table that is unique to that record. So I will name it customer ID. And I will say this is a primary key. Okay, so this is the customer table, and that's like customer ID is the primary key of that table. It's just one column that its values are unique, always be unique to every record in the table. Customer name cannot be unique. There's many customers with the same name, same family name, address, like phone number. But this, I will look at that column that is customer ID, I will know that every one of them is unique. That's how I uniquely identify a record. Now, a bike, okay? So each bike has its own attributes. There are attributes that are describing the features, the characteristics of that bike. Bike model, bike category, dimensions, any other like features that exactly giving you something about that bike. These are the attributes of that data entity. And I will place them in one place, okay? And then again, each bike gets one unique identity, unique identifier, okay? So here I will use bike ID. This is the primary key, okay? So bike ID, and then what do I have here? What am I recording about the bike? These are like for now, I think these are two fields or columns that I'm like I have about each bike model and category. And I will place it in the same table, same data entity. So bike model and then category. I also see another data entity here, is the reservation. Okay, reservation ID, reservation date. These are not for themselves, like not one bit, like one single thing. They're describing something else. What is that they're describing? They're giving you info about a reservation. So we have a data entity. What is that reservation? It has some attributes, some features that are describing that reservation. What are they? Reservation ID, reservation date, like what is like what we have like a price, and I think like price or cost of that reservation and payment method. Okay, so I'm gonna add another one, reservation. Every reservation is like uniquely identified with a number or like a unique identifier. It could be number or not. So reservation ID as primary key. Every table has its own primary key. Reservation ID. Then I have a reservation date. Price. What else? Reservation date, price, payment method. Okay. That's pretty much it for now. Okay. So first, identify the data entity. Second, identify each data entity's attributes. Attributes become the columns of that like table. If we look at them when we see the data, we'll have table for each data entity, and these attributes are the columns of those tables. So we did this, and then we assigned the primary keys. Now, the next step is to add the links. These data entities are related to each other. There is a relationship between them. How do we identify relationship? We can say, okay, each reservation is linked to a customer and a bike. Does that make sense? Is that right? Each reservation, like a customer placed a reservation for a bike. So there is a link between reservation with customer and bike. Can we have a reservation without having a customer and without having a bike? We have to have that. Looking at this table, I see reservation ID, reservation date, payment method, price. I don't see the customer. I don't see the bike. So this table is not complete yet. This data and the info about the reservation is complete yet. I still need two more pieces of like data to complete that. I need to record the customer and the bike. So that's about adding the links. How do we link this reservation to customer and bike? Now, from now on, we use the primary keys of those data entities as a way to link. Primary keys as a way to link. So in this table, by adding customer ID here, I link reservation to customer. I link reservation to customer by adding the primary key of the customer table. here. Okay. And when I add that, what do I call it? Here, I call customer ID foreign key. I call it foreign key. Okay. I call it foreign key. When you have the primary key of another table, here you call it foreign key. In the table itself, it's called primary. Okay. I still need one more link. Each reservation is linked to a bike. I want to add that link. I want to link reservation to bike. How do I do that? By adding the primary key of bike table to this table. Okay, so now I have bike ID as foreign key. Now it looks complete. I have the reservation. I have the cuts. I know that's how I will know who is that customer who made the reservation. This will tell me which bike was reserved. Okay, this is how we link the tables to each other using like the primary keys of those tables. Add them where you like in the table that we need those links. Okay, we place them in the like the table, the right table. What is that right table? Like you look at the table and say, okay, reservation like is linked to a customer and a bike. So I need the links here. Yes.
So if it shows up as a primary key in a different table.
Exactly. Right. Always primary keys now will show up in other tables, and whenever they show up, we call them foreign keys. Any other question? Okay, so now I created 3 data entities and then link them using the primary key of those tables and place them into reservations. Okay, so identify the data entities and their attributes. One table for each data entity. Add the data attributes to that data entity. Assign a key. Assign a key to each of them in that table. We call it primary key. Once we did that, then let's find the tables, the data entities that are linked to each other, and add that link. We use the primary keys of like different tables as a way to create that link. So after that change, after this change, after creating this, the result is going to look like this. Okay, so initially we had this table. Do you see like we have customer name repeated everywhere? Now we have this. See what changed, how it changed. Now I record every customer once. And here I only have the customer ID. Okay, the primary key of another of the customer table. I have bike model from the bike table. I have 3 bikes here, and like each one of them is uniquely identified with an ID, right? Each record in that table is uniquely identified with an ID. And then we use like the primary keys of those tables to create the link and also as a reference. So now when I look at the reservation and I look at this reservation customer ID, it tells me, it gives me some ID. If I want to know who is that customer, I want to know more about that customer, I can use that as a reference to go back to the customer table, and find all the information that I have about that customer. Okay. I can find additional information about the customer. So I don't have to repeat them again and again. I use the primary key, like primary key as a way to link. And now let's try that. I want to update a customer's address. This customer has placed 1, 2, 2 reservations. I want to update that customer's address. How many updates it takes? It doesn't matter how many reservations we have for that customer. It only takes one update because that record is on, like, that person is recorded only once in the customer table. So it takes one update to update the information about that customer. Okay, doesn't matter how many reservations we have for that person. It only takes one update. The same way about the bike. It doesn't matter how many like records we have for a bike. If I want to update the bikes, like let's say category, I will find that bike, let's say this one, and then I only like change that category once, one update to change all the records linked to that bike. Okay, so that's how we solve these issues. Redundancy, like identity, anomalies in the data table. So we created this 3 table and like added the links between them, and we come up with a much clear design. And it is solving the issues. Okay. Any question? Okay. So no repeated customer or model facts in reservations. Every foreign key points to an existing primary key. Point to an existing primary key. Okay. So if I see that here, this primary in like a customer ID, I'm 100% sure that there is one customer in the customer table with that ID. Okay. Every foreign key points to an existing customer. One is prerequisite for the other one. You have to have the customer to be able to record a reservation for that customer. So that's how we add, like, to create the entities, add the attributes. And when you look at the columns attributes of that data entity, you want to like look at every attribute and see, is this attribute describing unique thing about that particular data entity? If I have name, phone, address, price, does price give like describe something about customer? No. So that means that's not the right, like that attribute is not in the right place. So you have to check every attribute with that concept. Let me check that. Is this describing this entity? Yes or no? If no, this is not the right place for it. Characteristics, attributes, right? So you want to check that with the data entity. Bike model, model name, category. If I had a reservation date here, as an attribute in this data entity, then I would think, okay, does reservation date tell me something about bike? No. So it's not in the right place. This is not an attribute of this table, of this data entity. So every one of them has to be checked with the data entity. And then we have like the reservation updated table that only includes the reservation attributes or attributes of our reservation, and then the customer, a reference to the customer, and the file in that order. So just again, what's the primary key? A primary key uniquely identifies each row in a table. No duplicates, never null. Primary keys always have a value. Will always have a value. So when I look at a table, let me go back here. In any table I look at, the column for the primary keys will always have a value. Will always have a value, and that value is unique. That value is unique. how do we make sure that's unique? In most cases, like it's done automatically. Like for example, like when you get the this like you're like providing your inputs to get like a register for like a on Amazon or any other website. Like your information is collected, your data, address, name, phone number, and then when like the system attempts to record that data, it automatically generates a new number, a number or like any combinations, and then adds your record into that table. So you don't like do that manually, or the system administrator never does that manually. Because think about it, if I have 10,000 records in a table, how do I want to figure out that like I have to check every ID, make sure that like the new one that I'm adding is unique. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work out. So that's why we try to use different methods that we do that automatically. We do that in a way that we make sure that number, that ID here each record is unique. It's usually a random number, a combination of character, number, or like something like that, but just unique. And then you add record the rest of the info in that table. So that's primary key. And then foreign keys. Foreign keys is a way that you assign specify the link. You say this table has to be linked to another table. This entity has to be linked to another entity. The link actually says this data entity cannot exist without something else. Okay. A reservation cannot exist without a customer. A reservation cannot exist without a bot. So that's what this link will mean actually. And how do we specify that link? We use the foreign key. What's a foreign key? It's just a primary key of another table that we added to that table as a way to link that. So in the reservations, we add the customer ID, which is the primary key in the customer table, to the reservation table to be able to create that link. Okay. So when I look at the table, let's say I don't see the customer table now. I don't see the reservation table now. If I see here, if I look at this table, one thing I know there is a customer with this ID who placed the order. That's enough for me. If you need more information, just go and look at the table to find out who is that person and additional attributes of that person. But usually we just want to know, okay, what is the reservation? What bikes were reserved? And which person placed the reservations? How many reservations do we have for that person? You can just use this, be able to identify that and answer those questions. Any question? Before we move on to the next part, I want to also talk about one more thing about primary keys. Okay. So I'll mention this also later when we get to the point at some point. But now that we're talking about the primary keys, I want to mention one point. Let's look at the primary key. Okay. We said this is a unique identifier, unique ID for each record in the table. It is created randomly. It is generated randomly. So that means we also have to remember one thing, which is we cannot do any calculations on primary keys, right? So let's say, what is the average of reservation IDs? Does that make sense? Does that make sense, or is it is the result of average primary average reservation IDs make any sense or has any value in it? It doesn't, because it's just a random number. If you take an average of a random number, it doesn't result in anything. Right now, you say, okay, I know we cannot take an average because it has a character. But in most cases, you just see a number. for the primary keys, not a character. And it can confuse you to try to do calculation. So sum of customer IDs, average of customer IDs, average of bike IDs, sum of bike IDs. These things, like in calculation, because they're a number, but you will see number, can think that like makes sense. But you have to always remind yourself, no, primary key is a random number. I cannot do a calculation on. Okay. That's one thing I want to like remind you, and I will remind you when actually we're gonna like do something like that. And the only way that we are going to use primary keys for some type of like calculation is that we can like we want to just try to like count the number of records in a table. Count the number of records in a table. How do we count the number of records in a table? I want to see how many records exist in this table. I have to use one of the columns to say, okay, use this, just like count the values, count every record, count the value. Usually we use the primary key to count the primary keys. If you count the primary keys, we know that every primary key is unique to every record, right? So if you count them, you actually have the total number of records in a table. Okay, does that make sense? Every primary key is unique, right? So if you count them, you actually know how many records exist in that table. That's the only way that we use a primary key, counting. Other than that, we cannot do a sum. We cannot like sum them up. We cannot like take an average. We cannot find a maximum. We cannot find a minimum, right? These are just random numbers. They don't have a like a numeric meaning. Okay. Last session, we talked about the type of relationship between the data entities. We said there are two types of, like generally, there are multiple types, but the most important ones are one-to-many relationships and many-to-many relationships. We only talked about the one-to-many relationship. Okay, so let's also review that, okay, on this case. I want to bring up the table here just as a reference. Okay, let me see. Okay, so with every data entity, I'm going to write the data entity here, customer. When two data entities have a link, you can describe that link, you can describe that relationship. So we know that now here we have a link between customer and reservation. Okay. A link between customer, data entity, and reservation. And that link, you want to like describe it in some words. Okay. If there is a link between two data entities, you should be able to, you can describe them in both sides, from customer to reservation, from reservation to customer. So from both sides, you can describe that relationship, that link. The simplest way is this. Okay. One record, okay, in customer table is linked to ... That's the part we specified the type of relationship. Records in reservation. Okay, reservation table. Okay. So one record in customer table is linked to how many records? How many records in reservation table? How many records? And what we are looking for two things, minimum and maximum. Okay, so minimum, maximum. how many records? Minimum, maximum. Before I get to the table and look at the table and records in the table, I can say one customer, how many reservations? Many reservations, right? Kind of usually that's the case. I don't know what many means. Mean like no reservation. Could mean one reservation, could mean two reservation, could mean hundreds of reservation, right? Yes.
This, I don't wanna cut you off though. Like, okay, this sentence is referring to the primary, key only, because we're talking about the relationship and the only thing connecting those two tables is the primary key.
Exactly. So from there, we kind of added that link, right?
So one record is like one record in primary key of customers.
That's a great point. Let me just go back here so I can describe it. Okay. So here, the primary key is kind of like, it's like another attribute of that record. But now I'm just talking about one complete record. Okay, exactly. Very good point. I'm saying one record of the customer table, one row of the customer table is linked. When we say link, because the reason that we use the primary key here as a way to link, right? So that's kind of like that's the case. Like one record of the customer table or one customer is linked to how many records in the reservation table. That's when we can say, oh, okay, I might have a customer that doesn't have any reservation. I might have a customer that has one reservation, two or more. Okay, so when we talk about this, we want to try to specify two things, minimum and maximum. With that, let's talk about this. Let's use one of them to just kind of like see an example. I want to see like C004, that record, okay? That record is about one customer, but like the primary key kind of helps you to like use as a reference, right? That's the way that we link the tables. So let's look at this and say how many records we have for that customer. Two, one. We have two. Okay, we have two, right? We have two of them. So there is a customer with that ID and like has placed two reservations. You have two. How about like 003? How many records we have for that customer?
Only one.
One, right? So what does it tell us? It tells us we can have multiple numbers for them. But we still know that like one record could be linked to multiple. That tells us at least maximum is like could be one, could be two, could be three. But we kind of like say, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, like I don't know how many. So that's why we usually just use many or like more, just as a way to say, okay, many or more. Just use one of them. But I also want to talk about minimum. So this one could be a little misleading because like we have at least one record for each one of these customers. But minimum is very important to think about it, what you want to do. Usually like the conversation is about 0 and 1. Do you want to set 0 or do you want to set 1? And probably I think in 99% of the time, the minimum will always be 0. Always be 0, minimum. What does that mean? That means I could have a customer, I could have a record here, I could have a customer that I don't find any reservation for, right? I could have a customer that hasn't placed any orders, so I will not find any reservation in this table. So minimum is 0. Okay, does that make sense? Right? I could have a customer like this. I go and register on Amazon. When I register, my info has to be recorded in the customer table. But there is also like an order table in that system that I don't have any records in it because I haven't placed any order yet. So the minimum is all like is 0. Okay, but then again, yes,
Doing this, if I'm doing like a VLOOKUP or an XLOOKUP in Excel. Like, wouldn't we rather do that instead of all these extra steps?
I'm thinking to, no, you're pointing out something important. The reason is that we kind of like, first we discussed about like one thing, which was, Excel is very limited in terms of like data storage. It's like 32,000 records. So if you have a table of like 50,000 records, you cannot store it in Excel. So you have to find a different software application to manage your data. So we kind of like shifted from Excel to completely use a different software like Access that we are going to use. That's one way. The other way is that, so now we are storing like the data in this like soft application. So we have to find a way, like the one that you said, I think like actually is the way that you connect the tables in Excel. Like you try to find the like the info and like connect them. That's great. That is like in this context, that's how we try to explain them and like later we use them. But before we get to the functions that help us to get the result, I want to try to kind of like conceptually talk about these things and try to figure them out. Because when it comes to database design, the first step is the design, not about like the data. Because when you think about this and say, okay, you're going to use a system, you have to build a database for it to be able to use it. And that's what these are the steps we are taking. We are taking to identify the data entities, identify the links, and the type of relationship that exists between each data entity. Okay, great. Let's go back again. So minimum is in most cases is 0. But when it like, I want to also talk about 1 because it could be like, why don't we just set 1? Okay, I want to mention that when you like set a minimum to 1, it's a constraint. It's kind of a mandatory thing. Okay, it's a mandate. You say mandate that each customer, okay, you set mandate, right? Minimum, maximum. Mandate that each customer has to have at least one reservation. You mandated that. You mandated that each customer has to have at least one reservation, but it could be 1, 2, 3, 4, and more. So you mandated it, and it's not a good thing. Unless you actually, there is a reason for it. You don't want to mandate the customer to do that. That's why we never like take this approach unless like we don't set that mandate, unless we have to do it for some reason within that context. Like we get some information and says, okay, no, this is the case, and do that. So usually is 0. So what does it tell us? Let's review this. Each reservation, each customer, many reservation. Many reservations could be 0, could be 1, could be 2, could be many. Okay, so that way I can write down this. Okay, is linked. I'm gonna write it down this way to remember 0 or more records in that table. Okay, so one record in customer table is linked to 0 or more records in the reservation table. You could also write it down this way. Okay, just remember one record in customers is linked to many records in the order table. But that assumption, that minimum, like helps always to kind of like remind yourself. That's why I prefer writing it down with like including the minimum and also like the more side, the maximum side. With that, okay, so that is describing that relation, this connection. How about this side? From reservation to customer. So one record, okay, in reservation table is linked to records in customer table. So can you tell me minimum and maximum? Yes,
Both are one.
one, okay, one. Yes, no? How many? Anyone else? One record, let's go back to the table, okay? Why it's showing up, okay. Each reservation, each record in this table, each reservation is linked to how many customers? Each reservation, each record is linked to how many customers? One. Yes. Do you see this? I track this and I see this like customer ID and 004. How many customers do I have with that ID, with this ID? Only one. That tells me that there is always one and only one. In this case, there's only one and only one customer for each reservation. Okay. So for each record in the reservation table, there is one and only one customer. One and only one customer. So minimum is one, maximum is one. Okay. So I write this here, say it's linked one and only one. One and only one. And that's what we mean by one-to-many relationship. Called one-to-many relationship. One customer, many reservations. So we call this one-to-many relationship. Okay, one-to-many relationship. Later, we will talk about we will look into access as a way to do data management. And this is how we'll see the data entities in a database. The links between the data entities, the primary keys of each data entity, their attributes. So I see 4 data entities. I see the link between them. Which data entities are linked to each other. I see this like 1 and infinity. Do you see that? Like 1 here and infinity here. It says one customer, many rentals, one-to-many relationship. Okay. Each rental is linked to only one customer. That's how we specify it. This one here and then many. So each customer, many rentals, a rental, only one customer. Customer ID is the primary key here, and we have a customer ID here, which is the foreign key. Okay, are we done? Okay, so make sure for now, for today's class, what you will do is go to the last one, just download